a Charis group. I started doing this a year ago, and been working my way to Charis Christian Center. And thanks to Pastor Max and Pastor Lawson for allowing me to present this information. This information will be truly life-changing information. It has been for me, and it was for me before I ever began to teach it, and that's why I'm teaching this information. And you will learn more about this as the time goes on. I would like to just start out, first of all, with a prayer. And so if we just bow our heads for a moment here and just ask the Lord to be with us, to open our hearts and our minds to the truth, Lord. We just come to you in the name of Jesus. And I'd like to start with reading my sentinel verse here, and that's in Ephesians 3:20. And it says, "Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we may ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. Unto him be glory," the power that worketh within us. And that's basically how I ended up coming to this information, was in pursuit of a power within humanity that I saw revealed to me in my medical training as a medical student. And first of all, let me just. Is that?
I turned you down because you're ringing.
Oh, okay. I'm going to say a little bit about Focus, Faith, Heals, and I'm going to be telling you about how I got into all of this, because as you will begin to understand from my own testimony, this wasn't a very likely outcome to have me being in the position that I'm in to talk about the things that I'm going to talk about. A most unlikely sequence of events, actually. So Focused Faith Heals is a teaching program, and it's a program that's based on concepts that I've had revealed to me by the Lord in my own personal life, even before I knew God existed, even before I became a Christian. God was working in my life to show me things that I'm going to be sharing with everyone. And as that process occurred, it became more and more obvious that there was something at work that was far beyond what I was able to see, or far beyond I was able to put my fingers on. It was an invisible spiritual reality that began to occur in my life. And that's what has led me to this. But let me just start by saying that I had a knowledge of the truth within as a little kid growing up. I'm from a family with my dad was a family doctor. I have 5 brothers, one of 6 boys in a family. We grew up with all the right values, with all the right morals, with all the right ethics, but with absolutely no knowledge of God whatsoever, and no reliance on anything other than something that we could muster up within ourselves. So we were growing up with the philosophy that we were not limited, but there was nothing outside of ourselves that was going to contribute to anything in our lives. If you couldn't muster it up in your own person, then it just wasn't going to become a reality, which put all the onus on the individual, all the onus on us as individuals. And so with that as a background, I had this knowledge within as a little child that there was something in human beings that gave them an extraordinary potential to be successful and to live the highest quality of life to their desires. And I don't know where that came from, but I had that knowledge, and I remember hearing my parents and hearing other people in school and hearing my friends talk about other individuals, and I would hear who they were talking about, and I would think to myself, well, you know, that isn't the same concept, that isn't the same perception I have of that person. I've been blessed and gifted with the ability to look at human beings and look at humanity and see the good in every single human being that I've ever encountered. In 35 years of practicing medicine, in some of the most difficult human life trials, tragedies, circumstances, and situations, I can't ever remember a cross word that I ever had with another human being. I never left the presence of another human being with anything other than the highest regard for that person, and I think that worked both ways. So I had that I call it a giftedness, and I had also a knowledge that I was going to become a servant to mankind. And of course, my dad was a family doctor, and I saw him in his life and carrying out his medical practice and the goodness of his heart towards humanity, and that was a great model to follow. But even above and beyond that, there was a knowledge that there was a calling there that was coming from within. There was a small voice that was coming from within. And I will actually, in the course of this course, I will show you exactly where that voice from within originates, down to the molecular level, that we all have that voice within. And that very rarely do we ever develop the knowledge and skill to listen to that voice within. But that voice within is at work as we're speaking right now. That voice is within. And that voice has the knowledge of right and wrong within each and every human being. That voice is also the source, I think, of all knowledge. And I always say at the beginning of these courses that I'm probably not going to teach anybody anything that you don't already know. I'm convinced that the principles that I'm going to be talking about here, and this is because this is what people have told me, and this is what my own intuition tells me about myself and about the knowledge of humanity, that is that I'm not going to teach anything you don't already know. All I'm going to do is remind you of what you have already forgotten. You've got the knowledge. And I say that because when we discuss some of these principles and precepts and concepts that, I mean, some of the greatest minds in the world are just coming to realize now in the world of intellect, in the world of thought, you and I have had this information as well as every other human being has had this information instilled within them from the very get-go. It goes all the way back to originating in the mind of God. And we carry that information throughout our lives. And we have an internal technology that we're going to be discussing in great depth and detail through the course of this teaching. And it's going to build week in and week out. We have an internal technology that prior to today's time, it was almost incomprehensible for us to understand. I certainly didn't understand it because it's unseen. And it goes beyond molecules. And we're going to talk about molecules. We're going to talk about atoms and electrons and protons and the very substance and foundation of the universe. But we're also going to be talking about the substance of faith. And faith is a substance. And faith is a substance that flows. And I will show you and I will connect the dots in this course that shows you that the substance of faith has been recently discovered by particle physicists in the string theory of physics. That is the current foundational scientific information source for the structure of the very basis of the universe. And if you follow this scientific trail of knowledge, it leads us to the concept that the very foundation of everything in the universe is this substance of faith. And if you take the substance of faith and extrapolate it back even further, more foundational, more fundamental, I will show you that that is Jesus. That Jesus is the foundational structure of the entire universe. Everything in the universe can be extrapolated down to the presence of Jesus. That's on a molecular level, that's on a neuroscientific level, that's on a cardiovascular physiology level, that's on every single level of endeavor that we have. And why is that important? Because there is a book that reveals all that to us. And here I spent my entire lifetime reading books to understand life. That was my basic question and plea to God for my own life, my own pursuit, was that God revealed to me the truth of life, and it's all contained. It's all contained right here, and we will show that as we go through this process. This whole thing about faith, and I'll come over here to my faith board, and this is a diagram that I made that shows that faith is a substance. It's contained in these containers here. And we're all born with a substance of a measure of faith. And we can have that measure of faith fortified and potentiated through the Holy Spirit and through Jesus. And that this faith literally flows through the human organism. And that the human organism is based on spirit, soul, and body. And that the faith flow is necessary for us to live the fulfillment of God's purpose for each and every one of us. And that this faith flow unobstructedly flows from our spirit into our soul, through our brains, through our hearts, and down into our body. And it maintains our body. And these red clamps that I've got on this flow of faith are clamps that we will go through systematically and show how the tremendous potential that we have. Here's where the potential is right here. This is the great potential. But what is it that obstructs the flow of this potential from here to getting down to our soul and in our body? And that there are obstacles that occur. There are these clamps that get put on us from the environment, and from molecules, and from genes, and from our neurological development. There's all kinds of things that cause these clamps to obstruct the flow of the true faith of Jesus that we have available to us, this tremendous potential that we as believers have that flows through our body. And we will go through, as I say, systematically, we will go through week in and week out and begin to remove these clamps. And these clamps are easy to be removed. The basis of every one of these clamps is what you believe. Every single one of these clamps. In fact, you know that the most predominant factor that controls any life form is based on what that life form believes about himself. A single cell, whether a cell lives or a cell dies, is based on what that cell believes about its existence. And belief is no different when you take one single cell versus you take 50 to 100 trillion cells that make us up as an entire human being. Every single aspect of our life is based on what we believe. And each one of these clamps represent an unbelief, a disbelief, a false belief, or a lie, false doctrine. And we will systematically show how humanity, the world today, has been deluded by the adversary. This isn't a personality conflict. There's only two forces in the world. There's positive and there's negative. There's good and there's bad. There's evil. and there's good. There's God and there's the devil, and the devil wants to steal, kill, and destroy, and he is our adversary. Our adversary isn't a political party. It's not science. It's not Darwin. It's not any of those things. Those things have all been used by the adversary, but it's not all of them. What we believe and the misperceptions we have and the false doctrine we have has been cast upon us by religion, and it's also been cast upon us by science. Science has us believing false things about who we are. And if we believe what science has told us who we are, we're all doomed. And that's why there's so much sick affliction and illness in the world today, is because that's what people believe they are. They don't believe the truth. And we will continue to dismantle all of those elements of false belief, unbelief, out-and-out lies that have come from people in black coats in theology and people in white coats in medicine that form the basis of telling us who we are. And they've told us wrongly. And it's our responsibility. And we have the truth that's been presented to us, and we will delve into the truth to find out really who we are. Because once you find out who you are, then you can be fully capable of removing every one of these obstacles to the flow of the faith of Jesus. Now, who wouldn't want to be operating right now, today, in the full faith of Jesus? Mm-hmm. And that's why we're all here. And this is a concept this isn't only a concept that's being awakened in the church, the real church today, but people around the world today are talking about this evolutionary change that humans are coming into. And there literally is an evolutionary change. It's a progressive change. Get away from the word evolution. That's a nasty word. It has a nasty connotation to it, but some things evolve. Knowledge evolves. And the more knowledge we have, the more information we have. And as we expose these obstacles, we will begin to live in the fullness of what God's potential is for us. And His potential for us is that we are all creators. We all have the same creative potential as Jesus. We all have the same creative potential as the original Adam. You remove all these obstacles, and there's nothing that separates us from the original Adam in terms of the restitution of our relationship with God and the identification of our identity. Once we grab a hold of that identity and we believe that identity becomes, and that belief becomes the ruling factor in our lives, and then we have no more obstacles. And we will systematically go through and show that, so that we can live that fullness. And that fullness is talked about in the Bible, where it talks about, in my verse here, where I talked about Ephesians, where in 3:20, where it talked about the power that worketh within us. Well, that was in verse 20. Go back up to verse 18 and say, it talks about 4 dimensions that are available to us as believers. When we have become born-again believers, reborn into this realm of living, that we have available to us knowledge of the breadth, the length, the depth, and the height. That's 4 dimensions. And current medicine and science and the world says that we live in 3 dimensions. And that's when you live in 3 dimensions, and that's what you believe your life is involved in, that's what leads to sickness, illness, affliction, disease, and destruction and death. And we have a whole nother dimension that we live in. So we will go through and show that. Let me take a step back now to my own personal story. When I wrote my application to get into medical school, we had to write an essay, and my opening sentence in that essay I think about, well, it's not almost, it's every single day. Because I said I want to exhaust my human potential in the service to my fellow man. And that has been my mantra ever since I wrote that essay, that I want to exhaust my human potential in the service to my fellow man. That's my heart. So when I got into medical school, and I saw that within humanity there was this phenomenal potential, and I saw that potential residing in each and every human being that came across my pathway. And I saw that medicine wasn't aware of this potential. Medicine wasn't tapping in and facilitating this potential in people. And I saw that inability to tap into that potential was what was leading to people's disability and their disgust and their further disease and their death. It was literally making the difference in a lot of people's lives between life and death. I was taking care of patients in intensive care units, and there were equally ill patients in one room versus another room, and one person would live and one person would die. And as I would go over and review their charts and review all their numbers and all the molecules and all the medicines and all of this stuff that was going on that I was learning about, I would see that there was nothing on paper that made the difference. But yet when I went in and developed a relationship with these people, I could sense that there was something different about the person that lived. That person was tapping into an inner potential that the individual in the next room who died wasn't capable of tapping into. And I wondered, what in the world is that? What is that? So when I got out of medical school and got into my own medical practice, well, first, let me say how unlikely it is that I was able to even begin to pursue this in my life, because to get into medical school, you know, you had to be a good student. You don't have to be smart. You just have to be a good student. You have to learn. You have to know how to learn. Well, I had a learning disability. And all the way through my grade school and high school, every single end of every year, there was ever a parent-teacher conference. The teachers were meeting with me and my family, and they were saying very nicely, Mark is a nice kid and all this kind of stuff, but he'll never make it in education because he can't read. And I couldn't read. I never read an entire book until I got into college. I couldn't read because I couldn't comprehend what I read, and as long as I couldn't comprehend what I was reading, why even read? So I just threw the towel in and quit reading about halfway through my high school. So at the end of my high school career, I graduated in the bottom 25% of my class, just out of the goodness of some teachers' hearts that passed me on, because it wasn't because I earned anything there. Believe me, I remember one history test, I had 80 wrong out of 110, and I got a B in history that semester. Now you figure that. That doesn't compute. Yeah, you know, it's funny, and it wasn't funny to me at the time, because I was thinking to myself, here I've got this inner voice that's telling me that you are going to serve mankind in some way. You've got this desire, you've got this information, this knowledge from within telling you this, and it's like dangling a carrot. I would think to myself, well, why would I have this internal knowledge that is telling me this if I didn't have the capability to do it? But yet there was no evidence anywhere that there was any capability to even bring that into fruition. But I went ahead and I went to college against everybody's advice. I went to college. I actually stayed out of college for a year and worked in a factory. It was during the Vietnam War, and everybody in my age at the time was wanting to get into college to get out of going to the Vietnam War. And I actually joined the Naval Reserves and was going to become a medic in the Marines in Vietnam until I got rejected for other medical reasons. I'd had a football injury and couldn't pass the physical to get in. So then I just stayed out a year and I worked. And during that year that I worked, I grew up a little bit, and I took a correspondence course in English from the university. And lo and behold, after 42 essays and countless hours of study and work, writing these essays and having them reviewed by a neighbor who was an English teacher. I literally got a B in college English. And that was the flunk out course. So I thought, man, if I can get a B in this without too much difficulty, maybe I can make it. So I went ahead and went to college. And when I got to college, after the first 6 weeks, we had our first round of exams, and I was taking chemistry. Now here I am. Nobody knows that I want to be a physician. I didn't dare tell anybody that. They'd laugh me right out of the room. So the first semester of chemistry, and I barely drug through chemistry in high school, I studied for 58 hours for the first exam. Now think of that, 58 hours. Now that's dogged determinism. I mean, I was determined. 58 hours, and I flunked the exam. The second exam was a geography exam, and I studied for 23 hours, 23 hours for that exam, and I flunked the exam. I thought, how in the world am I ever going to make this? And in fact, the geography professor asked for anybody who flunked his exam to come in and talk to him if they wanted help. So I went in, and he looked at me and he said, where in the world are your generation's doctors and preachers and lawyers and school teachers and engineers? Where are all these people going to come from? Because I don't see them in my classes anywhere. And I'm looking at myself wanting to be a physician and having that desire in my heart to be a physician, to serve mankind, and I'm thinking, man, this guy is just giving me reason to crawl out of his office on my belly and never come back again. But he told me to start focusing on my notes. He used the word focus on your notes. So I went home and I started focusing on my notes. Nobody ever told me that I had control over the direction that my mind was in. Nobody ever told me that I had direction over how I could focus my brain. And little did I realize that is a tremendous potential that we all have, and that is the power of focus. That's why this is called Focused Faith Heals. Because when you focus your attention, when a human being focuses their attention, you literally change the molecular structure of your heart and your mind. This has been proven, and I'll show you evidence for this as we go. But when you focus your brain, you literally change the molecular structure of the brain to facilitate learning. So I started focusing, and I started realizing that my learning disability was a problem in that I would read without saying anything to anybody, and the words went in my brain and right out again. Didn't stop in between. Didn't make a picture. Didn't make an image, and that's the way the brain works. The brain forms images, and if your brain can't make an image, then it has no retention. You have no memory if you can't form an image. And my brain wasn't forming images. So I stumbled across this technique that I started saying every single thing that I heard in my lecture notes. I would go in and I would take my lecture notes down, and I would take every single thing down that I could possibly write down. And as soon as I got out, I would start rewriting it to reorganize it, and then I would start speaking it out of my own mouth. And as I spoke it, little did I realize I was teaching myself. I was focusing my brain, and I was forcing my ears to hear what they had just heard an hour before in the lecture. So I was hearing it a second time. And then I began to realize, well, if all this emphasis is on my ability to hear, that was the one thing that teachers used to say when I was flunking everything that I was taking in grade school and high school. They always would say, well, Mark is a good listener. I thought, that's the key. The key is in listening. What does the Bible say? How does faith come to us? It comes by hearing. So, but nobody ever told me that. I didn't know anything about the Bible. But it comes by hearing. That's God's facility. That's the facility He's given us. It's by hearing. So every single thing that I would write down in my lecture notes, I would say it again as I was rewriting it. And then I began to realize that when I read, if I spoke while I was reading, I was literally speaking to myself again, and I was hearing it another time. So I would speak. I went through 13 years of college in every medical library room that I studied in, and this is the way I read my books. I would read just like this, talking to myself in my ear. And if my ears are tilted forward, it's because I spent so much time cupping my ears talking to myself. But as soon as I talked to myself and I implemented that faculty of hearing, just as God's Word tells us that is the way that the most prized possession of God in us comes to us is through hearing and hearing the Word. So I continually spoke to myself. Every single thing that I even read to this day, I speak it into my own ear. So I was going into a lecture and I was hearing it the first time. I was also seeing it, then I was speaking it, and then I was writing it. So if you can hear it, you can see it, you can say it, and you can write it, your brain has it. That's the key to keeping your attention focused long enough to comprehend what it is you're learning. And this, I have taught, I can't tell you how many students that I've taught who have learning disabilities, and every single student that I've ever taught with a learning disability has gone from a D and an F to straight A's. Every single one. I was a tutor at the university after I picked up on this, and I picked up on this before the final exams came for that first semester in my freshman year of college. And when I picked up on this, I started getting A's and started getting B's, and from that moment on, I never got anything below a B in any exam or any final grade in my entire medical career. I was never off the dean's list for academic excellence, and it was embarrassing because here was this kid that everybody had told me that I was dumb, I was stupid, I couldn't learn, and I couldn't. I didn't know how to learn. Nobody ever taught me how to learn. And that's what you're already learning right now. I'm going to teach you exactly how to learn. I'm going to teach you how to use this technology that you already have. No better to learn it from somebody who didn't have it to begin with and found it and has been able to capitalize on it. And when it's no different than the internal technology that we're going to be talking about in the heart. But this is specifically the brain. But there's a whole other faculty that goes on in terms of our internal technology in the heart. So once I got on the dean's list and once I started acing everything in college, my first thought was, well, people are going to think I'm cheating. And fortunately, nobody ever came up to me and said, say, Mark, how did you go from getting D's and F's in high school to getting A's in college? Are you cheating? I actually wondered if some people didn't think that. In fact, I was wondering if my own family didn't think that, because my own family had written me off as being inferior in terms of my ability to learn, my ability to understand, and my ability to achieve academically. But they never did, thank the Lord. So anyway, I was able to accomplish all of this and get through my college and get into medical school and use the exact same techniques all the way through medical school, and was able to become the top in my medical school class. There's a medical society called Alpha Omega Alpha. It's the highest academic honor given in medicine. And I say this, I mean, there was a time that I needed that, but I don't need that at my age. But I bring that up because it's the truth, and it shows how you can go from down here all the way up here. And that it's just in learning how to use the potential that God has instilled within every one of us. And I began to notice that being a physician, I was a family physician. I took care of babies all the way from the cradle to the grave. So I took care of the entire lifetime of patients. And my goal for every single patient I ever had not only was to make them try to help them become healthy, but also to help them live to the fullest of their human capabilities. Because in the heart of every human being, there is that desire to live to the fullest of our potential. And when we're living less than the fullness of our potential, that is what leads to distress and disease in life. It leads to discouragement. It leads to failure. And there's no need for that failure because we have such a phenomenal potential within. We just need to learn how to implement that potential. We need to learn how to tap into that potential. We need to learn how to let that potential flow through our entire system, the system of the spirit, the soul, and the body, and the heart. And once that potential is flowing through, then we can begin to live the fullness that God has for us. And that is a reality that we can all accomplish. After I graduated from medical school, I came back into my hometown to practice with my dad. That was my life's goal, was to practice medicine with my dad. And he was my idol. He was my God, so to speak. That's who I worshipped. And during the process of coming back into my hometown, I knew every single person from generations in my town. I was the 6th generation on both sides of my family to live in this community. And I was taking care of generations of people. So my own heritage was 6 generations in this community. And I was taking care of, not uncommonly, 3 and 4 generations of the same family in the hospital at the same time. So I was seeing the entire spectrum of life as life transpired. I was watching this go on. And I was wanting and wishing and hoping that I could come up with what is the solution to man's greatest problem. And after about 2 years, I began to realize that what was really killing mankind wasn't the heart disease that I was treating. It wasn't the diabetes that I was treating. It wasn't even the depression I was treating. It wasn't, the thrill of medicine is great for doing a C-section in the middle of the night and having a beautiful baby, or having a kid with a ruptured appendix and taking the appendix out and the kid getting better, or treating pneumonia. But that isn't what I saw as being the source of man's greatest difficulties in their lives. And I began to, after the heart attacks were treated and the pneumonia was resolved, I began to develop a relationship with people. And that isn't afforded a person going through medical training. In medical training, you see people in a big major university medical center. You see them for a week at a time, and then they're gone out of your life. You never get a chance to know them, where they came from, what their wants are, what their desires are, what their needs are. You never get really to tap into that. So now I was in a position where I was making relationships with people, and I was sensing a tremendous amount of discontent in almost every single person that I was dealing with. It was a universal phenomenon. And I'm talking about all the bank presidents to the unemployed. I mean, it was everybody that I came into contact with. And I thought, this defies every biological principle that I've ever discovered in my whole entirety of my scientific investigation and training. There's no living organism on planet Earth that reaches a high level of sophistication to destroy itself, except one, and that's us. Humans are the only living organisms on planet Earth that willfully destroy themselves. Now that is a tremendous paradox. Why would there be such a state that the highest, most sophisticated living organism on planet Earth, why would we be the only living organisms that willfully destroy ourselves? And as I began to extrapolate people's illnesses and their afflictions back down to the least common denominator, the simplest thing was that I was taking, alcoholism, drug addiction, wife beating, spousal abuse, incest. I mean, all of these things that our society has labeled as diseases. Our society and social service agencies and medical societies label every one of those things as a disease. And I was thinking, God, life can't be that complicated. So I started looking, well, what's beneath that? And what I found that was beneath that was always a disordered interpersonal human relationship. A disordered human interpersonal relationship. There was some emotional discord in the person's life that was below the alcoholism, that was below the wife beating, that was below the child abuse, that was below the heart disease, that was below multiple sclerosis, that was below ALS, that was below Crohn's disease, that was below ulcerative colitis. It was an interpersonal relationship, a discord. And it wasn't a discord with the mailman or with the bank president or with the doctor. It was a discord with mothers and dads, discord between husbands and wives, discords between brothers and sisters. And here I thought these were the most cherished human interpersonal relationships in human life, and these were the very relationships that were killing people. I thought, man, what in the world is going on here? What have I got myself into? I mean, this just blew my mind as a young guy looking for the truth about humanity. So what is going on here? So so interpersonal relationships as the discord that creates anger, resentment, hostility, these were the diseases that I saw. Okay, so we go from all of these socially acceptable diseases that I began to realize these aren't diseases at all. They're symptoms of something. And what they're symptoms of is disordered interpersonal human relationships. That's what causes heart disease. Do you know that unresolved anger is the most common risk factor for coronary artery disease in our world today? Unresolved anger. It's not cholesterol, not smoking. It's not anything that people beat their drum about in medicine. It's the emotional management of their interpersonal relationships in lives. That's what causes it. And I've got heart disease. I've had a heart attack. I don't have heart disease now, but I've had a heart attack. I've seen the ultimate outcome of that calamity. So I'm here to tell you that is what it is. That's what causes. I have seen rheumatoid arthritis. I have had patients who have had such severe rheumatoid arthritis with a rheumatoid arthritis flare that they couldn't walk across the room. And I had put them on every anti-inflammatory drug, from steroids to methotrexate to Cytoxan to you name it. And the only thing that ever got some people over their rheumatoid arthritis was to, guess what? Put them in the hospital, take them out of their homes, take them out of their normal natural surroundings, take them out of their environment, and stick them in a hospital room. Now, unfortunately, medicine can't do that today because of the cost of medicine. But I've treated hundreds of patients with severe autoimmune diseases, and they're failing every single therapeutic intervention. And finally, I said, listen, there's nothing more I can do, but I'm going to try something. Let me put you in the hospital for 10 days. And you take a person out of their surroundings, you take a person out of that environment that is the source of their anger and their resentment and their hostility and their unresolved emotional issues, those issues of the spirit, you take them out of that environment and they got better. Now, I learned this in my molecular biology class when I was a senior in college. I worked with stem cells and I worked with frog embryos. And do you know that you could take a frog embryo cell and put it into a petri dish and watch it grow. And if you put a toxic chemical in that environment, in the petri dish, guess what happens to the cell? It gets sick. It gets sick. And do you know that if you rescue that cell by taking it out of that toxic environment and putting it into a new petri dish with a new environment without a toxic effect in it, that cell will revert all of the abnormalities of its illness and become a normal, viable, healthy cell. So an unhealthy cell retains every single capability to become healthy if it's in the right environment. And what does the environment do? The environment tells the cell what its identity is. And our environment in our lives tell us what our identity is. And if we go by what our environment tells us our identity is, rather than going by this book that tells us what our identity is, we'll be sick. But our identity is in this book is the truth. And when you begin to believe in this identity, the identity that God has given you, when you begin to believe that, guess what? Every single one of your cells is listening to every single thing you believe. And if you say something with your mouth, not only are your cells listening by the wireless internet in the body, but it's also listening from the outside. And if you're proclaiming something about yourself or your state of disease or your state of illness, your cells are listening to it, and that's how they begin to act. That's how they begin to function. And the way to turn that unhealthy cell into a healthy cell is to start to tell it that, hey, you weren't made this way to begin with. It's the same DNA in the healthy cell versus the unhealthy cell. It's the same molecular structure, same nucleus, same mitochondria, the same organelles in the cell. But if the cell believes that it's being misidentified, well, then that's how it's going to live. So you can totally take a cell or a human out of their toxic environment, and they will literally get better right before your very eyes. So when I saw that happen in these multiple times that I would put people in the hospital and watch them get better, it was astounding. It was unbelievable how they would revert. And what was even more astounding was that they would completely revert and they would become healthy. And then the discouraging thing was I would discharge them from the hospital and watch them in a week or 2 weeks or 10 days or 3 weeks and watch them get back into their toxic environment and watch them lose every single thing that they gained. And I would say to myself, how in the world, how can I solve that? How can I solve that issue? So I started asking people more definitively, what was the basis of their discontent? You know, we're extrapolating down from the fact that these aren't diseases, these are literally symptoms, and it's anger and resentment and hostility and all these negative emotions that are at the basis of discontent and the basis of interpersonal conflict. What is it that stands in opposition to that? So I started meeting with people after office hours, and I would say, what is it that you need in your life that you think, there's something inside you that's telling you the answer to your problem? And I don't even want to assume what it is. I want you to tell me what it is. Sir William Osler, the father of modern medicine, told medical students, unfortunately doctors don't listen to it, but this is what he told them. He said, listen to your patients. They're trying to tell you what's wrong with them. People know. People know what's wrong with them. But you have to ask them, and you have to be willing to listen to find out. They'll tell you. I mean, I made some of the most wonderful discoveries in medicine. Weren't my discoveries at all. I asked the patient. You know, I've been in medical conferences where I've seen 30 doctors reminiscing over and reminiscing and ruminating over a particular patient's problem, and they couldn't come up with the answer to it. And the question came to me, and I would walk out of the audience up to the patient who was in the room in medical school, right at the room, and I would say, what do you think your problem is? And 95% of the time they would say. And all the people who were supposed to be in the know couldn't come up with it. So what I would do would ask, what was at the basis of this discontent? What was missing in their lives? What is it that they needed? And I got 3 consistent answers every single time. The number one thing that they were missing in their life was love. The second thing was a resolution to their shame, forgiveness. And the third thing was meaning and purpose in life. And I would say, you mean to tell me that life can be boiled down to this simple? I mean, we have made this such a complicated thing multi-billion-dollar drug companies treating this, that, and the other thing. You mean to tell me that at the basis of leukemia is the absence of love, the absence of unforgiveness, and the absence of meaning and purpose in life? Yeah. That's what it is. And I thought to myself, man, if I can come up with what love is, what forgiveness is, and what meaning and purpose in life is, thanks, Max. I will have people circling the globe waiting to get in so I can give them their infusion of love, forgiveness, and meaning and purpose. So I started looking into every single human endeavor that I would fail to recognize in my own education. I literally went back to the university bookstore and I bought a whole shopping cart full of sociology books, psychology books, the history of theology, the history of religions, the history of societies, every single thing that had to do with human beings, I started looking into. And to my amazement, every single one of these books came to the same conclusion. And that is the single most important factor for human life is to love and be loved. Every single one of those human endeavors came to that conclusion. Every one of them. These people aren't stupid. They have followed the path of the truth, and the people have told them, love and be loved. And every single time I would read that in a book, I would turn the page waiting to find out, well, what is love? And what is forgiveness? And what is meaning and purpose? And there were blank pages. There was no answer there. So as I was discussing this in my own mind and trying to calculate what is it that's missing, where do you find the answer to this? How does this escape humanity? How did this escape me in my efforts to come up with this? And about that time, I was actually on call in our emergency room. I had just admitted a guy that had a heart attack, and his pastor came with him, who was a young fellow in town that I had just delivered a baby for, he and his wife. So I had some peripheral knowledge of him. But anyway, he asked me if he could talk to me one night, and after I got through in the emergency room. So I thought to myself, why in the world does this preacher want to talk to me? There's no way in the world am I going to go to church, so he can't be banging on my door for that reason. I hadn't been in church for 15 years, even darkened the door of a church. So I thought to myself, I can't not talk to this guy. That's impolite. So I said, sure, I'll talk to him. So the nurse sent him back, and I had just seen my last patient in the ER that night. And this young Pastor Steve came in, much like Pastor Max, and he said, Mark, he said, you look perplexed. I thought, well, here's my chance. I said, Steve, I am perplexed. I said, I have come up with a dilemma. I said, here we are, human beings, the most highly sophisticated living organisms on planet Earth, and we are the only living organisms that destroy ourselves. Now, that violates every biological principle that I have ever studied in any biological course that I've ever taken. Totally defies it, a total paradox. I said, that's what I'm perplexed over. But even more so than that, Pastor Steve, is that I've actually spent hundreds of hours talking to people, and I know what it is that is at the basis of this self-destruction. It's the absence of love, the absence of forgiveness, and the absence of meaning and purpose in life. And I said, being a biologist, I know what criteria the answer has to fulfill. Because being a biologist, I've looked at physical nature of man. We all need oxygen to live. If I take all the oxygen out of this room right here, I'll guarantee you 100% of humans in this room will die. Because we need oxygen to live. So I started thinking to myself, well, what are the characteristics of oxygen? Well, is anybody thinking about how much oxygen there is in this environment here? No, it's just there. It's just there. It's simple. Is it any more available on this side of the room than that side, or the back of the room, or the front of the room? No, it's equally available to all. How much are you paying for the oxygen you're breathing right now? None. It's free. So I thought, the answer to this problem is going to have to be simple, it's going to have to be equally available to all, and it's going to have to be free. If we live in a organized universe that has any laws to it that are fair to everyone, that's what it's going to have to be. So I concluded that in my own brain. So then this Pastor Steve says, well, after I told him about my dilemma and the fact that it was love and forgiveness and meaning and purpose that was missing, I said, I don't know the answer to this. And I said, I'm sure you don't know the answer to it either. Been nice talking to you. And I put my hand out to shake his hand, and he said, well, wait a minute. And he pulled a little pocket Bible out of his pocket, and he said, look at here, Mark, 1 John 4:8, God is love. And I thought, God is love. I mean, it just stopped me dead in my tracks. God is love. I mean, the first time in my life that anybody had ever told me that God was love. I mean, I had all kinds of concepts about smoke and mirrors and God being the Supreme Court justice in heaven, like my grade school teacher reprimanding me for my poor performance and stuff like that. That was the only concept I had of God. God is love. Well, it just stopped me dead in my tracks. In fact, I looked him right square in the eye and just couldn't believe it. And I said, you know, that is just astounding. And I said, well, okay, God is love. And I shared with him, I said, what does that mean? And he went to 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. This is what the definition for love. Love is patient and kind. It's never jealous. It's never envious. It's never boastful. It's never proud. It's never rude. It's loyal. It always stands your ground in defending someone. All of those characteristics that people had told me what was missing in their interpersonal relationships was contained in that definition in the Bible. That very same definition. I had paragraphs after paragraph that I'd ask people to tell me, okay, you need love in your life, define it for me. And they talked about patience, and they talked about kindness, and they talked about loyalty, they talked about trust, they talked about all those characteristics that were right smack dab in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. I said, well, that makes all kinds of sense. That's what love is. I said, but what about forgiveness? And then he told me the full gospel. He told me about Jesus, and I thought Jesus was at odds with God. I thought they were fighting over control of the universe. In my uneducated mind, I had absolutely no idea who Jesus was. And in fact, I told Pastor Steve, when he told me the definition for what love was, I said, you know, and I told him one thing. I said, you know, not everybody can read this book right here. So I said, Pastor Steve, if you can show me that God of this book right here has presented himself in the form that we can relate to, in the form of a living human being, I believe in him. Because that's going to have the greatest impact on mankind. He said he did. I said he did. In what way? He said he came down here in the form of his own son, Jesus. That is God incarnate. That's the living God. He did that very thing. He made you. He knew you were going to be a product of your interpersonal relationships. That's why he presented himself in the form of an interpersonal relationship. So it just blew me away. And then he proceeded to tell me what forgiveness. That every single sin, every single inadequacy, every single defect, deficiency that we have as human beings has been bought and paid for by the death of Christ on the cross. 2,000 years ago, it's a done deal. God's all satisfied. There's nothing left that anybody can charge us with. It's all a done deal. So the guilt and the shame that people were dragging for years and months and hours that ground away at their DNA, that turned the cancer genes on, that turned the inflammatory cells on, that destroyed the pancreas and created pancreatic cancer, that destroyed the pancreas and creates diabetes, that grinds away at the colon and causes colitis. All of the toxicity that comes from that shame And I've got a diagram that I'll share with you in our course here that I can extrapolate 95% of every human disease to shame. I can follow an algorithm and come down that every single 95% of all human disease and affliction can be reduced to shame, unresolved shame. And whether you know it or not, there are a tremendous number of Christians that are carrying shame in the form of one of those obstacles there, creating a defect in the flow of faith through your body because of the shame that you're carrying. You realize that there's absolutely not one single reason that a Christian should have an ounce of shame. There's not one reason. Total absolution. Total absolution in God's eyes. Nothing supersedes the death of his own son. And to carry shame is to say that Jesus' death is useless. Not only you don't deserve to be shameful, you don't deserve to have the ill effects of shame. That shame grinds away at our molecules. It grinds away at our cells. That's what causes disease. It inflames the joints. It destroys articular cartilage. It causes migraine headaches. It causes leukemia. Standing in prayer lines, when I pray for people that come up with stage 4 ovarian cancer or stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, and they begin to relate to me their medical history. You know, their medical history kind of goes over the top of my head because I know that. I've been down that road. I've been in that machine. But what's most distressing is that I'm wondering, what is it behind their heart? What is it behind all of this chemotherapy and radiation therapy and all this extensive surgical procedure and reconstruction? And what is it behind all of that stuff that's going on that is causing that person to be misidentified? That those breast cancer cells are coming from a misidentity, unresolved shame, not feeling worthy, not feeling worthwhile, not feeling good enough. And as I pray for those people, I know with 1,000% certainty, if they would believe what I believe, and that's why I share with them what I believe, they can turn the gene off that causes that cancer. Very early on, I started studying spontaneous remission of cancers, stage 4 cancers. I've spent 40 years studying spontaneous remission. Do you know what causes spontaneous remission of cancer?
Holy Spirit.
Amen. A change in your belief. Every single person that I have ever interviewed, and I've spent hundreds of hours talking to people who have spontaneously been cured of stage 4 disseminated, Katie bar the door, you're dead cancer, and have spontaneously remitted their cancer, and every single one of them has had a change in their belief. And see, medicine can't do that. There isn't a molecule that will do that. That has to come from the power of the Holy Spirit. That has to come from the conviction of truth. That has to come from accepting and believing in your identity. And as soon as you grab a hold of that identity and claim that identity for yourself, and to yourselves, you've just taken all those red clips off of the flow of Jesus through your body and soul to heal you and to allow you to live the fullness of the will of God and the provisions of God in your life.